First of all, thanks for making time. And I know that we're talking on the 5th year anniversary of August 3rd. So I remember talking to you, obviously, when all of that was happening. I spoke to you a year after the event. What does this anniversary mean to you? It came at a time in your life, you actually suspended your presidential campaign on August 3rd. What does this 5-year mark mean to you?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to think about both the resiliency and the strength of our community, and also the incredibly unfair burden that we have placed on the families of survivors who lost, their fathers, their grandmothers, their sisters, their brothers, their children, and who will live with that pain and that suffering every single day of their lives. And they will be forced to do so for a mass murder that didn't have to happen and yet was totally predictable based on the rhetoric and the actions taken by former President Donald Trump, who described immigrants as an invasion, talked about them as animals and an infestation. We think of infestations of cockroaches or rats, things that we would want to exterminate. So much so that he inspired somebody to travel 600 miles from Allen, Texas with an AK-47, who posted ahead of time that he had come to repel the Hispanic invasion that he had heard about. That rhetoric is still out there. And in fact, it seems to be amplified since 2019. You have Governor Greg Abbott talking about invasions. You have Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick talking about replacement theory. If we let these immigrants in, they're going to somehow be able to illegally vote in our elections, support Democrats, and replace white people in the state of Texas. The fact that people in positions of public trust and political power are still able to traffic in this incredibly dangerous rhetoric should be a red flag that all of us pay attention to. When you combine that with the extraordinarily loose gun laws in Texas, an 18-year-old can walk into any gun store and buy as many AR-15s and rounds of ammunition as they want to. We saw the consequences of that in Uvalde 2 years ago. Someone can buy an AR-15 out of the trunk of a private seller. We saw that in 2019 in Midland and Odessa, and too many people lost their lives because of that. There's no red flag law in the state of Texas, no universal background check. So there are common sense things that we can do together to make it less likely that we have another August 3rd happen anywhere in Texas or anywhere else in this country. And really no place on the planet is better positioned to lead this conversation than El Paso, Texas.
To be clear, a lot of people may already be forgetting the fact that Patrick Crusius came to El Paso after posting a screed online saying he was here to stop the Hispanic invasion of Texas. That's something that I feel, anecdotally perhaps, that over the past 5 years has been forgotten somewhat and minimized. So what you're talking about is that rhetoric, and specifically the word invasion, other descriptive terms that are inflammatory. Is that a fair criticism, Beto, in the sense that what we heard during the recent assassination attempt against former President Trump was that the left had actually demonized him to the point of inspiring a shooter, although that's not clear at all, that hasn't been sussed out. But is it fair to say that if people are using the word invasion, as the governor has used, as former President Trump has used, that it's, you're responsible for the acts of an unbalanced person?
Absolutely. There's a phrase, a term of art called stochastic terrorism, where the stochastic terrorist, in this case, President Trump, doesn't say, go out to the Walmart in El Paso on the Saturday before school starts in August of 2019 and murder 23 people. But what he does say is that we have an invasion, we have an infestation, we have animals who are coming in here. He shows us by putting kids in cages and separating children from their mothers when they've completed this 2,000-mile journey at our front door right here in Texas, that we are supposed to treat these people as somehow less than human. So yes, Donald Trump absolutely created the conditions that made this almost inevitable. He was aided and abetted by other people in positions of extraordinary power. Greg Abbott on the eve of the Walmart shooting in 2019, sent out a mailer to our fellow Texans that said, because of this invasion, it's time to take matters into our own hands. And Texans, we must defend ourselves. This military rhetoric that is matching people who are fleeing absolute brutality and deprivation, taking their lives and the lives of their children in their own hand to make this journey to this country because they literally have no other choice. It is absolutely beneath us. It is inhumane, it is cruel, and it has produced the political violence that we have seen in El Paso, that we saw in Buffalo not too long after that, following this great replacement theory. So this call to political violence that we see especially on the right wing, where Donald Trump promises that if he loses, there will be a bloodbath, where he has shown us on January 6, 2021, that he's perfectly willing to incite violence to stop the peaceful transfer of a democratically, legally, fairly decided election. The consequences of that going unchecked are the scenes of violence that we're seeing across the country, and potentially much greater violence going forward. So it is incumbent upon all of us as voters to make informed decisions about those who will represent us in these positions. If you don't like this political violence, if you don't like the division, if you don't like this hateful, polarizing rhetoric, then please choose people who reflect our values and our interests, who talk about a country where all are treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve as human beings. And for my money, I see that in our Congresswoman, Veronica Escobar. I see that in our Vice President, Kamala Harris. I see those qualities in other Democrats who are running to reunite this badly divided country at this incredibly decisive moment in our history.
That mailer that you mentioned from the governor's office in 2019, there was an apology that was issued shortly thereafter, and there seemed to be an effort to cool the rhetoric in the immediate aftermath of the shooting. There was even, I believe, I remember that when Trump came to El Paso, he even was talking about gun reform. That, of course, went nowhere. But that certainly seems to have gone out the window. Is that safe to say, even at the state level?
Absolutely. And it's not just the hateful, violent rhetoric of the governor, it's his actions. Under Operation Lone Star, we've seen migrants and migrant families bear the brunt of really unimaginable cruelty. And I'll give you an example. In the El Paso Border Patrol sector, which, as you know, covers all of West Texas and all of southern New Mexico, 5 years ago, 6 migrants in total for the entire year lost their lives while trying to enter the United States. Last year, more than 120 migrants lost their lives. And these are women, these are children, these are folks who have drowned in the Rio Grande River, who've died of exposure and dehydration in the southern Doña Ana County desert. These are folks who have paid the full price for a governor who sees refugees and asylum seekers as a mortal threat to this country, who for political advantage is willing to play games with people's lives. And if there's a place in this country that can respond to that effectively, I think it is El Paso, which is one of, if not the safest cities in America, one of the strongest, most successful places anywhere on earth, not in spite of the fact that we're a city of immigrants, but because we are a city of immigrants and because we treat one another with this fundamental kindness that I think distinguishes El Paso from almost any other place that I've been to. It makes me so goddamn proud to be an El Pasoan, and I want that message and our story to be conveyed to the entire country. Because if we fail to tell our own story here in El Paso, Donald Trump will tell our story for us. Greg Abbott will tell our story for us. They will describe El Paso, as they have in the past, as a dangerous, violent place where there are threats that must be contained by military force. And what happens is that we lose the lives of extraordinary human beings who are doing everything they can to come here, yes, to do better for themselves, but as we know from the story of America, they're also coming to do better for all of us. And we see that in El Paso, this beautiful city of immigrants. So I really hope that El Pasoans will continue to answer the call. will continue to make one another proud by standing up for the very best of us as Americans and standing up against this hatred and cruelty that we see from the former president and our current governor.
Well, you alluded to the election, you alluded to November and the former president, who is the Republican nominee. Once again, we find ourselves as we head into 2024. And if this conversation had taken place a month ago, it would have seemed like a foregone conclusion that Donald Trump was headed to re-election, according to the polls. That has certainly all changed in the past few weeks. What are your thoughts on what's been just, I guess there's no other way to describe it, but like a historic turn of events when it comes to the Democratic Party, Biden stepping down, Harris seemingly rising to the top of the ticket? How do you feel about all this?
It's the best time in a long time to be a Democrat in America. Beginning with this incredibly noble, courageous, selfless decision by President Biden to step aside as a candidate, to focus on executing his responsibilities as president for the remainder of his term, and to elevate his vice president, Kamala Harris, to ensure that she carries the banner for Democrats into this incredibly decisive, important world historical election that really will decide the future of America, and I think by extension, the rest of the world. And then to see almost every single Democrat, to a person, get behind Kamala Harris and support her candidacy. And we see record-breaking fundraising numbers, record-breaking attendance numbers. And, you can't quantify this, but there are smiles on the faces of Democrats for the first time in a very, very long time.
Vibes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it does seem that way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so what a difference a month can make. However, going into these final 3 months of this campaign, we know that at some point this honeymoon is going to be over. The intensity of the attacks from the Trump campaign against Kamala Harris and against Democrats in general it is only going to escalate. And all of us must do all that we can with what we have, where we are, to make sure that we're up to this challenge, that we support her, that she wins, and then we also win other really important contests up and down the ballot. I mean, here in El Paso, that's Veronica Escobar, who's done an extraordinary job of delivering for this community. Whether you measure it in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that she's brought into this community, or this singular voice in the Congress that represents the United States-Mexico border with the pride that we really deserve here in El Paso, all the way up to Colin Allred, who is the best pickup opportunity for Democrats to win a new seat in the United States Senate. And that would come at the expense of Ted Cruz's position in that chamber. And as you know, we lost to Ted Cruz in 2018 by just under 2.5 points, one of the closest Senate races in American history, one of the biggest turnouts for a Democrat in Texas history. Colin is going to build on all of that. And on top of it, I just think he's an extraordinary human being, a talented candidate, a bipartisan legislator in Congress, and we're counting on him to bring it home. But he's also counting on all of us to do our part. So in El Paso, I run an organization called Powered by People. We register folks to vote. We target those young El Pasoans who otherwise might not get registered, might not get on the rolls. Last night, I was at Burgess High School at the Burgess High School, return to school fiesta. Man, the energy there, the band, the cheerleaders, the athletes, the students, these incoming freshmen with wide eyes who are coming in. To see that again made me proud to be an El Pasoan, but also just as encouraged by the number of parents who weren't registered for whatever reason, who got registered. The number of 18-year-olds who are going to be able to vote in their first presidential election. This is how we fight back. And when we fight, we win. And I feel really good about our chances because of all these extraordinary volunteers doing the work that's necessary right now.
Just quickly, but I'll push back a little bit. Let's talk about Biden's decision and whether you mentioned it was a courageous decision. But how do you feel about the argument or the criticism that this decision should have made courageously a year ago, should have been made, because if Harris becomes the nominee, she has like 100 days to run a campaign.
Yeah. It may turn out to be accidentally a kind of genius in that the Trump-Vance campaign really don't have the time to lobby the kind of attacks that they did against Hillary Clinton, not just in 2016, but they were lobbying attacks on Hillary Clinton for, a dozen years before that. Right. And the culmination was her losing that incredibly important election in 2016. For Kamala Harris, the entire Trump campaign has been geared to fight Joe Biden. Now they find themselves having to defend a nominee who, if he wins, will be the oldest elected president in American history, who's having extraordinarily weird slips and strange things that he's saying on the campaign trail. And really the bizarre behavior of his vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, has sucked all the oxygen out of that campaign at the same moment that Kamala Harris is ascending, not just in dollars raised or attendance at her events, but in her polling numbers, where nationally she has pulled even to Donald Trump, and in battleground states, she's beginning to pull ahead. So I don't know all of the factors that went into President Biden's decision. What I do know is that it has resulted in a very favorable set of circumstances for Democrats, and now it's on us to make the most of it.
Beto, thanks for making time and talking to us.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming by. Appreciate it.